On this particular morning, as Mr. Jeremy stood on his doorstep, great big splashes of rain began to fall into the pond, creating perfectly round, expanding circles on the surface of the water. The raindrops made a lovely rhythmic sound, plop, plop, pitter-patter, against the broad leaves of the water lilies. Mr. Jeremy looked up at the sky, his big, bright eyes shining with quiet excitement. He wore a smart little waistcoat of faded green and a soft yellow linen shirt. But because of the rain, he pulled on a pair of shiny black galoshes and a grand protective Mackintosh made of smooth, waterproof rubber. "I will go fishing today," Mr. Jeremy said to himself in his small, croaky, yet incredibly soothing voice. He looked toward the corner of his cosy hallway, where his most precious possession rested against the smooth stone wall. It was a beautiful, ancient fishing rod made from a slender, dried reed, fitted with a tiny, gleaming brass reel that had a small handle carved from a piece of smooth river shell. This brass reel was his dearest companion, a true talisman of his quiet life by the water. Whenever he held it, the cool metal and the familiar, soft click, click, click of the turning handle gave him a profound sense of peace and confidence. But Mr. Jeremy knew he had to be mindful of the time. He looked up at the old wooden sundial near the reeds, and then at the thickening mist, the soft, silvery mist that was beginning to rise from the far side of the water. He knew that when the sun began to sink below the horizon, the thick evening fog would roll in and cover the entire pond like a heavy velvet blanket. He had promised his dear friends, Sir Isaac Newton and Alderman Ptolemy Tortoise, that they would have a wonderful dinner together tonight. He wanted to catch at least 5 small, delicious minnows before the mist grew too dense and the clock of the sky signalled the end of the day. With his slender reed rod in one hand and his precious brass reel secured tightly, Mr. Jeremy stepped out into the gentle rain. He did not use a wooden boat, for a frog has a much better way of navigating the calm waters of a pond. He walked down to the water's edge and untied his favourite vessel, a magnificent, broad, round, green leaf of a water lily. It was perfectly flat and floated beautifully upon the surface, bobbing up and down with the gentlest movements of the current. Mr. Jeremy stepped carefully onto the centre of the leaf, adjusted his shiny galoshes, and used a long, smooth hazel twig to push himself away from the shore. The lily-leaf boat slid smoothly across the water, moving into the open spaces of the pond, where the water was deep and incredibly quiet. Mr. Jeremy sat down cross-legged in the middle of his green raft, letting the hazel twig rest by his side. The pond was alive with a slow, hypnotic motion. Slender water skaters danced with impossibly light steps across the surface, leaving tiny, faint ripples that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Beautiful, iridescent dragonflies with wings like spun glass hovered quietly above the tall green rushes, their bodies gleaming like tiny jewels in the soft, overcast light. Mr. Jeremy watched them with a peaceful smile, feeling completely at one with the gentle world around him. He paddled his leaf boat to a magical spot where the water lilies grew in great, crowded clusters, their large leaves overlapping to create a secret, shaded kingdom on the water. Here, beneath the green canopy, the water was dark and cool, a perfect place for little fish to swim. Mr. Jeremy took his reed rod, checked the tiny brass reel with a delicate touch of his webbed fingers, and cast his line into the water. The line floated down into the depths, and Mr. Jeremy settled in to wait. The rain continued to fall, a steady, whispering song that seemed to lull the whole forest and the pond into a deep state of relaxation. For a long time, nothing moved. Mr. Jeremy sat as still as a stone, his green waistcoat blending perfectly with the foliage around him. He watched the little red float on his fishing line, which bobbed gently up and down with the breathing of the pond. This is a wonderful place, he thought, listening to the soft drip, drop of water falling from the willow leaves above. The air smelled of fresh rain, damp moss, and the sweet, clean scent of water mint. It was a fragrance that filled his little frog lungs with tranquility, making him feel completely safe and content in his quiet endeavours. After nearly an hour of absolute quiet, Mr. Jeremy noticed the silvery mist on the far shore, beginning to creep a little closer across the water, swallowing the distant trees in a soft white blur. The clock of the day was ticking. The thickening mist reminded him that the evening would arrive sooner than he expected. He looked down at his little float. Suddenly, it gave a sharp, distinct tug. Bob! It went completely under the water, leaving a small, swirling eddy on the surface. "Ah, a bite," whispered Mr. Jeremy to himself. He gripped his slender reed rod tightly, his fingers resting reassuringly on the smooth brass reel. With a practiced, gentle movement, he gave the rod a quick flick to set the hook. But instead of the soft, playful tug of a little minnow, the line went instantly taut, stretching tight like a guitar string. Something down in the dark, cool water was pulling back with surprising strength. The brass reel gave a sharp, metallic click, 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 as a little bit of line was drawn out into the depths. Mr. Jeremy reeled in slowly, carefully turning the tiny handle made of river shell. The water began to churn, and out of the deep green shadows rose a small, fierce-looking fish covered in sharp, defensive armour. It was a little stickleback, a creature with a row of formidable prickles along its back. The little fish was tossing and turning, thoroughly annoyed at being disturbed, and it splashed water all over Mr. Jeremy's nice, clean waistcoat. Before Mr. Jeremy could safely guide the fish onto his lily leaf, the stickleback jumped out of the water, wiggling frantically in the air. In its struggle, it bumped right into Mr. Jeremy's webbed hands, pricking his fingers with its sharp little spikes. "Oh dear! Ow, ow, ow!" cried Mr. Jeremy, dropping his rod in surprise. The little stickleback, freed from the line, dived back into the water with a loud splash, disappearing instantly into the safety of the deep weed beds. Mr. Jeremy nursed his pricked fingers, blowing softly on them to ease the tiny sting. He looked at his hands and then at his reflection in the water. He was not angry. He knew that the little fish was only protecting itself, as all creatures do. He picked up his reed rod, reeled in the loose line, and put a new, tempting bait upon the hook. The mist was rolling closer now, a soft, beautiful curtain of white that made the edges of the pond seem to disappear into a dreamscape. He had to be quick if he wanted to provide a feast for his arriving guests. He moved his lily leaf a little further out, near the centre of the deep pool where the current was slow and lazy. He cast his line once more, the little red float landing with a soft plink on the glassy water. Once again the great peaceful silence of the pond enveloped him. He watched the mist rise from the water like gentle steam, wrapping the reeds in a soft embrace. The world was becoming quieter and quieter, as if it were preparing to go to sleep. Mr. Jeremy felt a pleasant drowsiness tugging at the corners of his mind, but he kept his eyes on the float, determined to catch his fish. Suddenly, the water beneath the lily leaf grew entirely still. The water skaters fled into the reeds, and the dragonflies fell silent. Something very large was moving slowly through the deep, dark shadows beneath Mr. Jeremy's floating raft. A great, dark shape, much larger than any minnow or stickleback, glided silently through the underwater forest of stems. It was a grand, ancient trout. A massive trout with shimmering scales of silver and gold and great dark spots along its powerful sides. The trout had lived in the deepest pool of the pond for many years, seeing everything that passed above. With a sudden, powerful movement of its broad tail, the great fish surged upward toward the surface. It did not care about the little bait on the hook. It saw the bright yellow linen shirt and the shiny black galoshes of Mr. Jeremy Fisher floating right above its head. Before Mr. Jeremy could even realize what was happening, there was a magnificent churning roar in the water. The trout opened its wide, dark mouth and rose out of the depths like a shadow, snapping down instantly upon Mr. Jeremy Fisher, his lily leaf, his rod, and everything else in one great, spectacular gulp. But you see, my little ones, there was absolutely nothing to fear. The great trout swam down into the deep, dark, cool mud at the bottom of the pond, shaking its big head from side to side. But almost immediately, it discovered that a frog wearing a shiny, thick rubber Mackintosh and slippery black galoshes is not a very comfortable thing to hold in one's mouth. The rubber was terribly smooth and tasted quite awful, and the Mackintosh was so slippery that the trout could not get a proper grip. Furthermore, the sharp tip of the reed fishing rod was tickling the trout's throat in a most unpleasant manner. With a great, disgusted shudder, the massive trout opened its mouth wide and spat Mr. Jeremy Fisher right back out. The little frog flew through the water like a cork from a bottle, rising rapidly toward the light. He popped out of the surface of the pond with a soft pop, splashing into the air before landing safely on a wonderful, soft, squishy bank of thick green moss, right at the water's edge. Mr. Jeremy lay on the warm, soft moss for a moment, catching his breath. He was quite wet, and his beautiful green waistcoat was a little rumpled, but he was entirely safe and sound. He looked back out at the wide pond, where the water was settling back into its peaceful, glassy state. The great trout had disappeared back into the deepest depths, never to bother him again. "My word," said Mr. Jeremy, squeezing the water out of his yellow shirt. "That was a very remarkable adventure indeed. I am exceedingly glad that I decided to wear my thick rubber Mackintosh today." He looked down at his hands and suddenly felt a small pang of sadness. His beloved fishing rod, the slender reed he had carried for so many years, was gone, lost somewhere in the deep, dark waters of the pool. But as he looked closer at the moss beside him, his eyes lit up with joy. There, caught tightly in a clump of wild watercress, was his precious brass reel. It had detached from the rod during the tumble, but it was perfectly intact. It's the carved handle, shining like a little piece of gold in the dimming light. Mr. Jeremy picked it up carefully, wiping away a bit of river mud, and held it close to his heart. The smooth, cool metal felt familiar and reassuring, a promise that many more peaceful days lay ahead. The thickening mist had now reached the shore, wrapping Mr. Jeremy's little earth house in a thick, protective blanket of soft white. The sundial was lost in the shadows, and the sky had turned a deep, beautiful shade of twilight blue. Mr. Jeremy knew it was time to go inside and prepare for his friends, even though his fishing basket was completely empty. He hopped cheerfully across the slippery mud of his front passage, kicked off his shiny galoshes, and hung his wet Mackintosh up to dry in the hallway. He built a wonderfully warm, crackling fire in his little hearth, using dry twigs and pieces of sweet-smelling willow bark. The golden light of the flames danced merrily across the smooth stone walls, filling the house with a cosy, inviting glow. Soon after, there came a polite, slow tap at the door. It was his dear friends, arriving just as the night began to fall. In walked Sir Isaac Newton, the handsome Newt, wearing his finest tailored coat of gold and black, his long tail sweeping gracefully behind him. Right behind him came Alderman Ptolemy Tortoise, walking with immense dignity, and carrying a grand, crisp head of fresh green lettuce in a small wicker basket. They sat down on comfortable, low, mossy cushions around Mr. Jeremy's wooden table, the warmth of the fire soothing their damp skin after their walk through the evening mist. "I am terribly sorry, my dear friends," Mr. Jeremy said as he poured them cups of warm, sweet clover tea. "I have had a most eventful day, but I am afraid I have caught no fish for our dinner. A great trout took my rod, though I managed to save my dearest brass reel." Sir Isaac Newton smiled kindly, his dark eyes twinkling in the firelight. "Do not worry at all, my dear Jeremy," he said in a voice as smooth as river silk. "An empty basket means a full heart, for you are safe here with us, and that is the greatest treasure of all." Instead of minnows, Mr. Jeremy fetched a grand dish from his pantry. He prepared a beautiful, steaming roast of wild salad, mixed with sweet clover leaves and garnished with a delicate, creamy sauce made from water lily nectar. Alderman Ptolemy Tortoise thoroughly enjoyed the feast, eating his lettuce very, very slowly, his jaws making a quiet, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch that sounded like autumn leaves underfoot. Sir Isaac Newton drank his tea with great politeness, telling wonderful quiet stories about the hidden tunnels beneath the old stone bridge. The three friends sat together for hours, safe from the damp cold and the thick white fog that now pressed softly against the window panes. Inside the little house among the buttercups, everything was filled with warmth, friendship, and the soothing sound of the crackling fire. Mr. Jeremy Fisher looked at his precious brass reel resting safely on the mantelpiece, and then at his dear companions. He knew that the pond would always have its mysteries and its adventures, but the truest happiness was found right here, in the quiet comfort of a peaceful home. The story of the little frog and the great pond is now complete, and the night has arrived to carry all the small creatures into a deep, untroubled sleep. The raindrops have stopped their patter, leaving only the soft, rhythmic breathing of the earth. As the fire in Mr. Jeremy's hearth slowly fades to a warm, gentle ember, your mind can let go of every thought, drifting away into the quietest spaces of your dreams. The end. Thank you for listening to Grandma's Tales. Sleep well, little ones, and may your dreams be as peaceful as the misty pond. For more audiobooks for preschoolers or 3-year-olds, stay on our channel. And don't forget to visit Grandma again tomorrow for another comforting bedtime story. Good night.